All right, everybody. So here we are for week 12 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. This week we're going to talk about Karate Kid, the franchise.
You're the best around. Nothing's going to ever bring you down. You're the best around.
Just because you can't see me, I'll tell you I'm dancing to Wayne's wonderful singing.
Woo.
All right, so it all starts...
3 months straight?
Huh?
We've been at this 3 months straight.
Yeah.
People are still listening.
And that's good, you know. Or not, whatever.
I appreciate you.
We definitely appreciate everybody listening here and on iTunes. Thank you for your support. It's been fantastic. I think we had like over 200 downloads. We hit over 200 downloads recently on Buzzsprout. Yeah. So I haven't seen the iTunes data, so I can't say how we're doing on there. But hey, you know, whoever wants to listen, it's really fun to do these, so we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into the Karate Kid franchise. It all started in 1984 when Daniel LaRusso and his mother, Lucille, moved from Newark, New Jersey to Reseda, Los Angeles, California. Their apartment's handyman, an eccentric gentleman, but kind and humble, Okinawan immigrant named Mr. Miyagi.
Hey, Mr. Miyagi, you fix my sink? Oh!
So... this movie kind of burst onto the scene in 1984. Obviously, you know, Wayne, you were 2, I was 1. We weren't like standing in line, obviously, to see this movie, but we saw it. I'm assuming you and I both saw it probably a few years later once it hit home video and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it became part of our childhood. Karate Kid was pretty big in the 80s. It made karate super popular. It introduced the world to Ralph Macchio, who had done a few movies prior, but for the most part was kind of like a side character. He was in The Outsiders, obviously, so that was a big movie, but it wasn't necessarily like a Ralph Macchio movie.
Stay gold, pony boy. Stay gold.
Yes. And it, it launched him into the stratosphere of being a star. And it definitely, watching these movies and watching the series lately, you know, I've been looking up information, and they didn't want to cast Pat Morita because he was a comedian. He was an actor who did a lot of comedy stuff. He was funny on Sanford and Son, and obviously he was a big hit on Happy Days. And they weren't sure that he could pull off the dramatic role that this required. They were looking at other Japanese actors, mainly more dramatic actors, but they settled on Pat Morita, and he earned himself an Academy Award nomination for this role of Mr. Miyagi in 1985 when the Oscars were for 1984. And everything else is history pretty much after that. That made him a well-known Asian actor in America, and it got him a lot more like dramatic roles and stuff like that. So I think it really helped his career. And you know, he was older obviously at that point. He'd been doing a lot of stuff, but it really shot, as we said, it shot Ralph Macchio to the stratosphere, which I don't think he ever really... obviously, as we're going to talk about later, he never really escaped this role. And it doesn't help that he's looked young for almost 60 years of his life. Like, the fact that he's almost 60 should make people go, oh, crap.
Yeah, he could probably pass for late 30s.
Yeah,
easily.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, he does not
Being
look...
in my late 30s, that kind of upsets me.
Yeah. Yeah. People always say I'm older, son of a bitch. When this movie hit, you know, it was big for kids, but I think... it did have a good adult audience, and I think that's what helped this movie be successful. And The Karate Kid, it's a really good movie. I just rewatched it the other day. I haven't probably seen it in a little while, so not everything was as fresh, so I wanted to rewatch it. And Mr. Miyagi, Pat Morita, is fantastic in this movie. Elizabeth Shue is really good in this movie. I'm not the biggest fan of Ralph Macchio's acting, but it serves the role for what you need. We'll talk more about his acting later. But William Zabka, very good as the bully. And Martin...
Come on, Mr. Miyagi, it's the
80s. You make him sound like John Travolta. Martin Cove... Martin Cove plays John Kreese, who is
one of the most dislikable bad guys in 80s pop movie history.
And what's funny, so we're going to talk about him, and he was great. He's a great villain. He does great in this role. He's perfect for it. And we'll talk about the other villains in the other movies. And you say one of the best 80s villains in Martin Cove. we definitely get one of the worst, in my opinion, in the third one. So we'll get to that in a little bit here.
Terry Silver.
Terry Silver, who is an actor I've liked in other roles. Thomas Ian Griffith. Yeah, so we'll get to that in a minute. But Karate Kid, I can't really remember the first time I saw this movie, but I know as a kid I saw it a number of times. I loved it. I still love it. I still stand by. It's still a good movie. It's not cheesy, really, I don't think. It handles the story of kind of growing up and having to deal with high school and bullies and what you can do to kind of make your life easier before you get onto college and become an adult.
Great soundtrack, too.
Oh, the soundtrack's fantastic. It really is a good soundtrack for the 80s. And like I said, it's just a sweet movie. You know, and I mean sweet like as in like it's a sweet kind of kid movie that you can enjoy with the whole family. And it has a great climax at the end. I like how and it's funny because John G. Avildsen, who directed Rocky, directed this movie. And so it's kind of like he did Rocky, which was the adult sports movie, and then in the 80s he did Karate Kid, which was the kids sports movie. And he directed him very similarly, I think, and I like how the end they don't do like any slow motion stuff in that last kick. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. There are going to be spoilers throughout this whole episode, so if you haven't watched the Karate Kid series, you may want to, watch them first and then come back or whatever. It's been 30 plus years. So,
building off of your great climax, I also enjoy a great climax in film, of course. This movie is at least in my top 20, if not higher, of like childhood defining movies.
Yep.
And I still probably watch this every 6 months or so, just because I'm feeling nostalgic or this, that, and the other thing. It's just a great feel-good movie. Elizabeth Shue, I will admit, is one of my first childhood crushes. I was crushing on her hard as a young man.
How could I blame you? Karate Kid, Back to the Future 2 and 3, and Adventures in Babysitting, which I love her in. Mm-hmm. Fantastic movie. For another time, though. We'll talk about that one later. But
absolutely. I also want to talk about the one, I'm going to call it a conspiracy theory about this movie that we're going to touch on before we move forward.
On the Karate Kid?
Yes, or introduced by a certain gentleman named Barney on a certain show about meeting a certain mother. We'll get into that a little bit after the review.
Yes.
About who the true villain actually is.
There, and we'll talk about we'll talk about this when we get into Cobra Kai, because there is some of that and about who the villain is and what you can and how when you look at things from a different perspective, how you can see things. And it is funny over the years how people's opinions have changed on whether Johnny was really a villain or not. And I think after rewatching this movie, and this is just going to be my opinion right here, he's not really the villain in the movie. And Mr. Miyagi says so. The villain is John Kreese, who is teaching these kids to do bad things. And Mr. Miyagi even says that in the movie, that you're only as good as your teacher. And John Kreese he knows karate very well, but he's a crappy teacher. He scares these kids into being good at what they do. And what they do is good is bullying nerds and people they don't like. And that's
intimidation tactics. It's pathetic.
Yes, exactly.
And it's not the style that they're portrayed in Karate Kid and all the Karate Kid movies. I believe it's called. It's a form of Ishinryu, and I learned this from my wife Miranda, who actually studied Ishinryu. And
interesting. It
turned out is a 3rd-degree black belt. So I'm going to watch my season when I talk back to her from now on.
She's just been holding back on you.
Wow, she's been real nice to me.
Yeah, she's like, I could have killed you like 4 times by now, but I'm gonna let it slide.
All right, so let's get into this breakdown, or move forward, sir.
Sure. Just, I guess, to sum up the first Karate Kid, it's a great movie. I think it's great for kids because it shows you what you can achieve when you believe in yourself and you believe in something. And the fact that he learns karate more as a defense mechanism than as a way to beat people up. Mr. Miyagi.
And how he learned is interesting too, because he thinks he's just being taken advantage of to do housework for his old man.
Yes, which definitely comes in down the road too. But yeah, so it's like it's being able to take the things that you learn. It's basically muscle memory is the type of karate that he's taught, which is really cool when you think about it, that someone could actually learn that way. And I'm sure it's something that they practice, otherwise it wouldn't be in this movie. And I know I was reading that Pat Morita had like ninth degree black belt like on set with him while they were working on this movie to teach him all this stuff and make sure he was doing everything properly, because he had not been trained, I don't believe, in this type of karate, or I don't know if any kind of karate. So this movie, I think, really set up the franchise to start. You don't need another one. The first one's good enough on its own. But as we know, when you have something that's very successful, you're going to get sequels. And the 80s were big for that. And we get Karate Kid Part 2.
I love how they picked this one up at the exact, right where the first one leaves off. You got to suspend some disbelief because Ralph Macchio is a bit older,
yes,
a bit fatter, but hey,
The thing about Karate Kid Part 2, and that's a very 80s thing that they did, was they had, Rocky was notorious for doing this too, starting the movie with what happened in the previous movie. Rambo did this. It was just one of those things that you did back in the 70s and 80s. I don't know why. I guess they felt like it was kind of like a serial, like a TV show, so they had to give like a recap. So they give like a recap. It starts off with him and with the crane kick to Johnny's face again. And then we get a little bit of what happens after that, which is Kreese being a bigger jerk in the parking lot, breaking Johnny's trophy, but then Mr. Miyagi teaches him a lesson. We find out that Kreese is basically like lost it, and no one wants to be part of his dojo anymore, so then he just goes away. And then the mother is basically gone in this movie. Mr. Miyagi gets news that his dad is really sick and gonna pass away soon, so he's got to go to Japan. Right. Daniel doesn't want him to go alone, thinks it'd be a nice learning trip as well, and heads to Japan with him. And this movie, why I like parts of this movie, it could have done with, I think, a little more like karate and like action. It's more of like it's an interesting story because it's more about the backstory of Mr. Miyagi and why
it's a double love story. And if we're gonna go down this path, you know what I mean?
You're right. Yeah, it is.
And, we've got the love triangle of all things between Sato and Miyagi, and forgive me, I forgot her name, but the love interest between the two.
Yes. And then you have Daniel with the girl that he likes, plus the bully, which is basically the Japanese Johnny. He's a little worse, I would say. The only thing is watching. So we go through this movie, and it's a lot of drama. It's a lot of back and forth of like, oh, I'm better than you, and Daniel going, I don't care. Like, I don't like trying to be like Mr. Miyagi taught him. Like, you can be better than me. I don't have to fight you. That's fine. I don't want to fight you. And obviously, we all know it's going to end in a fight. Eventually, Mr. Miyagi and his brother or half-brother, they were raised like brothers, right? But they weren't actually brothers, I think is what it was. And so they like eventually make up during some storm that Daniel and Mr. Miyagi help save people in the village. And they're cool after that. But it's not cool with...
the nephew?
Yeah, is it Chosen?
I was going to say, because on IMDb, we're looking at Karate Kid Part 2, and they are well into their adults in these pictures, and I'm not honestly sure what the nephew is, but I'm going to say,
Chosen. Okay. So the nephew of Sato is not happy with his uncle, and he still...
Doesn't the uncle kind of say that he's dead to him?
Yes,
he wouldn't go out and help Daniel?
Yes, exactly. Because the uncle
obviously is not the right course of action. Obviously,
no. The uncle looks at him as a coward now. So, which kind of like what Kreese did with them in Part 1, Sato does with them in Japan. He kind of teaches them to be merciless in their way of karate and stuff. But then when it comes to him not going out and saving the girl or helping Daniel, he's a coward. So then his uncle wants nothing to do with him. And that really, he's got to earn the respect back for his uncle, which leads to, I guess, the inevitable fight to the death. Which, let me just start by saying, as a parent now obviously when I first saw this movie, I wasn't a parent. As a parent now, watching this movie, if my son came back from Japan and was like, yeah, Mom, I got like in this fight to the death, and like, it's just something, I'd be really upset at Mr. Miyagi if I found out that my son was in a fight to the death.
Why? He won.
He did win. That's not the point.
That's now, if my kid comes back in a body bag, then I have an issue. See what I did there? If you can remember, we're going back to the original Karate Kid. There are some epic background mics going on with some of the Cobra Kai fighters, and what is that in the background? You can see him over Kreese's shoulder going, "Get him a body bag, yeah!" And that's actually one of my just favorite things of all time. I say it rather frequently, ad nauseum.
Yes, it's a great line. It's very memorable from that movie, often misquoted, but as most great lines in history, they usually are. But yeah, back to part 2. So like the fight at the end is really cool.
Yes,
I like it. It's done really well. My only issue with it is it's like the last 10 minutes of the movie. So it's like again, it's just one of those things where it's like you go through, you come up with this first movie which had a lot of good like karate action, bullying, kids bullying each other, they're fighting back and forth and stuff like that. And this one I think was missing a decent amount of that. I mean, it was cool to see him break the ice at the festival or whatever, or at the
well, I mean, they came and destroyed all the potted plants.
They did, but there wasn't as much fighting back though. Even when he like put them in their place, it took Mr. Miyagi like 5 seconds, and he pointed the spear at the kid's face, and then they ran off. So it to me, it just wasn't, like I said, it just didn't make me feel like the first movie. It's a good sequel, but it's not like to the par. It's not on par of what it should be. It's something like a Rocky 2, which I thought was a great follow up to Rocky. This one I didn't feel like it was as up to snuff. But it's a good movie. Is there anything else you want to say about part 2, Wayne?
I did like at the end how they tied in the drum technique, because the first movie was the crane technique. Obviously, we saw in Karate Kid Part 2 where he's on the pier or the post.
Yes.
Or whatever, it's the stage with the metal rusty hook that comes down and drum technique. So I like how they finally tied that in and everybody had the little drums, and I don't know, I enjoyed it. I agree that, it's not the greatest sequel, but it gets the job done. One of the interesting things about these movies is Daniel and the loss of love interests, because Allie in the first one, Kumiko in the second one, it's like, I mean, obviously we don't expect Kumiko to travel across the world for a teenage love interest, but, Mr. Miyagi and Yuki, they had a devotion to each other for 60 plus years, even after other marriages and whatnot. So
well, she didn't get married. Remember, that was the thing she said in the sequel. She said, he goes, "Oh, so I assume you're married now," and she goes, "I never got married." So that was kind of sweet for a little love story of that movie.
Kind of makes Miyagi go, "Ooh,
yeah," like, "Oh man."
Well,
anyway, so. That one ends. You're right. The love interest thing I thought was kind of odd. The way they wrote them out too, it was obvious it was a contract thing. Pretty sure Elizabeth Shue went on to be in Back to the Future Part 2 around that time. So
her career was really taking off at this point.
So she was busy.
Was it 87, 88?
Something like it was right around there. Yeah. Well, the third one was 89, so it had to be. It was 86. So that was probably right around the time she was filming Back to the Future Part 2. So I'm assuming that's probably why she wasn't able to. She probably had to pick and choose, and she chose right, in my opinion, because I think Back to the Future Part 2 is a much better movie. Still, we get a good follow-up. Not bad. And then we move on to Karate Kid Part 3. And this probably was one of my favorites as a child, because it probably has the most action. When I was young, seemed like the cool villain. But you heard me talk earlier, I just rewatched this movie, and let me just make sure I get his name right this time. I'm pretty sure I got it right the first time. Thomas Ian Griffith is Terry Silver. It's not good in a lot of parts. There's some parts where he's okay, but for the most part, when he's trying to be bad, he's not very good at that.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get to
Sean Kanan is Mike Barnes, another guy that I just absolutely despise.
Yes.
Even in other roles. I hate this guy.
What's funny is he reminded me of the villain in Rocky V, also directed by John G. Avildsen. So I don't know if there was a correlation, but yeah, he wasn't good. So let's get to the plot here real quick. In September 1985, John Kreese, who is now broke and destitute after the loss of his students, visits his Vietnam War comrade Terry Silver, a wealthy businessman who founded Cobra Kai and now owns a toxic waste disposal business. Silver vows to personally help him get revenge on Daniel and Mr. Miyagi and reestablish Cobra Kai, sending Kreese on vacation to Tahiti to rest and recuperate. So this is the first time that we hear John Kreese has passed away, and obviously it's a lie, and we know that because at the beginning of the movie, Terry Silver sends him on a trip, a vacation to get better, to get his ego better, and then he appears later in the movie. So Terry Silver hires the new face of karate, who we said Barnes, right? Mike Barnes, and he's
Sean Kanan.
He's
the actor.
Yes,
the
actor. He is in a magazine cover. He's called the bad boy of karate. So you know that he's going to be worse than Johnny, a bigger D-bag than Johnny, which he is. And so this movie, instead of being about karate mainly, it's mainly about Mr. Miyagi and Daniel LaRusso trying to get away from karate and start a tree store, a bonsai tree store, to be exact. And he meets a girl across the street who has her own pottery store, who's also like 19 years old and has her own pottery store in California, I think. So that's kind of weird. She's played
before the boomers ruined the economy.
Yeah. It must have been. So she is played by Robin Lively. Her name is Jessica Andrews. Robin Lively is the older sister of Blake Lively. She started acting in the 80s and acted through the 90s. Still does some things here and there. I believe this is one of her bigger, earlier roles. And
I love those redheads. Yes, I do. Yes. I do.
All right. It's not as much of a love interest as they are just friends. She makes it clear that when she goes back to visit her family in Ohio, that she is still with her boyfriend and they're going to try to work it out. So her and Daniel develop a friendship that, yes, there's some flirtatious things going on back and forth. They keep it pretty platonic throughout most of the movie. And it's a nice addition. She's a good actress. She's very sweet in the movie. She does a good job. This movie, it just kind of meanders for a while. It goes back and forth between them at the bonsai tree store, and then Mike Barnes shows up and destroys the bonsai tree store. Then they put it back together, and then they go to get a new bonsai tree because all the bonsais got taken. The bonsai that Mr. Miyagi planted on the side of the mountain, which then gets wrecked, and then they got to bring it back to life or whatever because Mike Barnes shows up for no reason. Like, there's no indication of how he knew that they were there, but they must have been following them is what you have to draw the conclusion because there were no cell phones, obviously. No GPS or anything to track them back then.
I just remember being really sentimental about the bonsai tree and the actual scene where, he breaks it in half and Daniel's got to go down and get it and get the salt water off the roots and whatnot. And, it made you care about a tree.
It did. It did. It's definitely a very emotional movie. But then to me, it's basically whenever you bring in Terry Silver, that it just kind of feels like a bad 80s TV show where you got this villain who's just very cartoony and so much of a character that it's hard to believe like he's even that evil. It's like, because Kreese was so bad and so good at being bad that they had to make Silver worse, and he wasn't like that convincing, and it was very telling that he was having a hard time being a villain. He was
when he's training Daniel and he's showing him how to be dirty and everything.
Yes, he's better when he meets Daniel when they're not training. Like, he's better as the nice guy, where you're like, oh, okay, well, he's playing the nice guy here. He's actually good at playing the nice guy. He's not good at being a villain, which is funny because in the 90s, he played one of my favorite villains, Valak, in John Carpenter's Vampires, and he was really good in that role. However, he doesn't speak very much, so maybe that had something to do with it.
For me, he was just too smiley.
He was. It was
a really bad villain to be smiling all the time, unless you're, like, sadistic.
Well, because he was trying to do the evil smiling, and he wasn't good at it. It was like He
was too damn charming because he's too damn beautiful.
It's like when you do... It's like when you do the spoof movies, though, and you have your villains go, ha, 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 and it keeps going. Like, he did that, but it was bad. Like, it didn't fit with the movie. It was like that one scene, and I feel bad for Martin Coe for being in the scene with them. It's Barnes, Kreese, and Silver after Miyagi and Daniel leave the dojo when they're trying to beat up a 20-year-old, three like grown men beating up a 20-year-old, which obviously he was older than that by then, but still, regardless of the movie, he's about 20 years old, and they're teaming up on him to beat him up.
And Mr. Miyagi makes the most epic entrance.
Yes. It's a great entrance, and it's a great, like, tactic. Like, he beats the crap out of him, which is fun. But then when they, like, We've got him. He's not going to live through the next competition. Ha 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 ha. And then
as my ponytail is covered in paint.
Yes, and then Kreese starts laughing, Barnes starts laughing. It's just like it's total cheeseball. The last fight is pretty cool, I think, when we get to the end. But then, again, it's very anticlimactic. Like, they're like, we're going to beat him, and you're going to get $50,000, Mr. Barnes, if you beat him. Well, guess what? Daniel wins. And instead of, like, showing that they're, like, super upset, Kreese and Silver are just like, shucks. And they, like, look at the crowd, they're like, boo! And then they walk away. And then the movie ends. And you're like, what the hell was that? Like, it was just so, like, you could just tell they're like, yeah, this movie's going to end. We got to be over with this movie. And it has
mistakes were made.
It has entertainment value to it. It's just not, in my opinion, it's just not a very good movie overall.
Speaking of movies that are not very good, it gets worse.
And if you can believe it, it gets worse from here. The next Karate Kid stars...
Also the title of the fourth movie.
Yes. Very true. Stars Hilary Swank, and Pat Morita returns as Mr. Miyagi. She plays the granddaughter of a war veteran that was friends with Mr. Miyagi. They were like buddies in World War II. And the grandma is having a hard time with her. She can't handle her. Her parents are both dead. The grandpa is also dead. And she is a troubled teen.
She's having trouble coming to grips with the term "boys don't cry."
Her first Oscar win. So that's the other thing too. This movie had a 2-time Oscar winner and an Oscar nominee in it, and it's god awful. You could tell that she was still learning acting because she's not very good in this movie. It does star a young Walton Goggins, who people will know him from Justified and
Tiger
and Sons of Anarchy and The Shield, all on FX. He's a big FX guy. He's been on a bunch of HBO stuff. He's really funny. Early role for him, obviously. He's playing like a teenager. He still looks like he's a 40-year-old as a teenager. Even though he was like 20 years old, he still looked old. And he's okay. I'll be honest, in my rewatch, I watched 40 minutes and I turned it off because it's pretty bad. And it's obvious that she's still dealing with the loss of her parents. That's what they were going for in this movie. She knows how to fight because her grandfather and her father both taught her karate, which Mr. Miyagi taught to her grandfather, and then the grandfather taught her father. So that's kind of the connection. Is there's that Kevin Bacon connection of, like, even though she didn't really know him, she knew him because she knew the karate that he taught. So he brings her in, starts teaching her. And I didn't finish the movie, and I haven't seen it probably in 20 plus years. So I remember what happens. She wins against the total evil douchebag who just, I don't know, is a loser, and she beats him, and that's it. Don't watch this movie. It's terrible. Wayne, do you remember anything about the next Karate Kid?
No, and I couldn't bring myself to spend the $2.99 to rent this movie. I just couldn't do it. I remember that there's a fight at a gas station early on in the movie. And
I don't think I even made it there, so it had to be like a good hour or so into it.
Yeah.
It was, and I can already tell you, I only watched 40 minutes. It was too long. It's like an hour and 47-minute movie, so it's close in length to the other sequels. Not worth your time. It's such a disappointment that until recently, this was like the last effort for the franchise.
Mm-hmm. But wait, there's more.
There's more. In 2010, Will Smith produced the Karate Kid remake, which starred his son, Jaden, and Jackie Chan. I'm a huge Jackie Chan fan. I have been for years. Jaden Smith is okay. Take him or leave him. He's not a great actor, I don't think. He's okay. This movie was probably unnecessary. However, I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. It was definitely one of those movies, I think, under a different title, you may have been able to get away with, it's a movie inspired by The Karate Kid, or paying homage to The Karate Kid, because it's really not The Karate Kid.
One of the things that I got knocked on is because it's not actually karate that he's studying and performing. It's more of I believe it's a type of kung fu. Yes,
which is something that Jaden Smith wanted in the movie because he was younger. He was like 11 or 12, and he was obviously playing video games, and that's what was popular in his video games. And I'm sure probably have played some of those same video games. So I could understand that being something. And his dad's a producer on the movie, so he got his way of them changing it. It kind of is almost a remake of the second one because they go right to China, I think. I can't remember if it's China or Japan because Jackie Chan is Chinese. They may take it. He may go to Japan. I don't remember. I was going to rewatch this one, but after I couldn't make it through the fourth one, I stopped. I was like, right. I'm not going to put my wife through having to watch these with me in the house because she was making fun of them all week or the couple days that it took me to watch the first three at least. Because she's not a fan of these. And she, even when she found out I was watching the show, she was like, oh, God. So this movie, like I said, it's been 10 years since I saw it. So I don't remember it a whole lot. I remember being entertained by it and not hating it. Kind of similar to like the Ghostbusters remake and some of the other like remakes that are out there that aren't great but aren't completely awful. Like are competently made movies. They're just not... they're not for me necessarily. Like this is probably a good kids movie for kids that grew up from like 2003 to 2007. They probably really like this movie a lot.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. If the movie would have been more successful, it would have gotten a sequel, or they would have done something to that. And because it just didn't hit on the right notes and didn't resonate with fans, we got what we got. And apparently, for a while, a good 10 years, it seemed like, well, or not 10 years, but for 5-7 years, Karate Kid's dead. We lost Pat Morita, and it's just it seems like all right. Well, it's time to put away one of my favorite franchises from childhood. But then in comes YouTube with our review of the week. Take it away, Kirky.
Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai. There is no fear in this dojo. Sweep the leg, Johnny. Okay,
so before we talk about this series and how much Wayne and I love this series, we're going to talk about how the series came to be. And now Wayne had alluded to How I Met Your Mother earlier in the show. And that, I do believe, is a big reason why we have this show in our lives. Mm-hmm. It started with Barney Stinson and How I Met Your Mother. He always talked about how he wanted to meet his idol, the champion from Karate Kid, the hero. That's who he wanted to meet. So they do a birthday party, and they get this hero for him. And they're like, oh my God, we got him. And it's Ralph Macchio. And Ralph Macchio is there because he's the hero from Karate Kid, right?
Yep.
Barney Stinson is not happy with this because to him, the hero from the Karate Kid is Johnny Lawrence.
William Zabka.
Played by the lovely William Zabka, who does get some cameos in full episodes in How I Met Your Mother. Wayne, I know you haven't seen that show. I recommend it to you, honestly, just for those alone. Because I believe he's actually in the finale, too. Like, he has a good, significant role towards the end of the season as William Zabka. So,
that's fantastic.
Anytime they do, like, a guy's night out, like, towards the last, I think it's the last 2 seasons, William Zabka is usually around. Because, let's be honest, he wasn't really doing much.
Well, I mean, I love Zabka. He's a good 80s bad guy. I mean, he's a jerk in Back to School.
Yes.
And if you guys aren't familiar with Back to School, this is a recommendation. Watch it.
Well, and we talked about that before. We talked about just one of the guys where he plays the douchey boyfriend.
Yep.
That's another recommendation. Check that out. Zabka, he kind of made his name for that. And I think he kind of went away in the 90s because that role kind of went away. There wasn't the 80s douchebag guy so much anymore. And it's unfortunate he got typecast as that. So we get to Cobra Kai. It debuted on YouTube Red a couple years ago. I think it was 2018.
Sounds about right.
And
while he's looking that up,
yes, May 2nd, 2018.
Couple episodes were actually free to watch, trying to entice people to subscribe to YouTube Red. Unfortunately, I am kind of embarrassed to say that I did the 10-day subscription to Power Watch, binge Karate Kid, and then did not renew the subscription. I'm sorry.
Well, and so now we'll get to this now because Cobra Kai has been bought by Netflix. It's on Netflix. That's where we both just watched it recently. We're going to talk about it as a Netflix show, but it did start. We have to thank YouTube Red for starting it and taking a chance on it. Mm-hmm. And it's been successful. It was one of their most successful things. They're going away from the scripted content, which is why they got rid of the show. And it's now found its home at Netflix, and I think it'll probably be here for at least 3-4 more seasons, I would guess, because that's about Netflix does about 3 of their own seasons. Season 3 is done. We're just waiting for it to hit sometime in 2021. This is a review of Cobra Kai seasons 1 and 2. So I'm going to give the small plot synopsis here. 34 years after his defeat in the 1984 All-Valley Karate Tournament, Johnny Lawrence, now in his 50s, works as a part-time handyman and lives in an apartment in Reseda, Los Angeles, having fallen far from the wealthy lifestyle in Encino that had been enabled by his verbally abusive stepfather, Sid Weinberg. He has a son, Robbie Keene, with ex-girlfriend Shannon Keene, but he abandoned them both when both Robbie was born and Johnny's mother, Laura, died on the same day. Johnny admittedly has never recovered from his breakup with then high school girl, Allie Mills. So that's where we start in episode 1. Johnny gets fired from that job they talked about because he said the woman was bitching at him. And she said, "You called me a bitch?" And he's like, "No, you said you're bitching at me." And that's why he got fired. So he goes and he gets drunk, which is what you'll see in the series when you watch it, is what Johnny does to make himself feel better.
Mm-hmm. Self-medication.
Yes. And he meets this young kid, Miguel, at the local quickie shop, gas station area, or quickie mart. At the local.
Who also lives at the same apartment complex.
Yes. Miguel lives in the same apartment complex as Johnny. They meet at the quickie mart, and Miguel's getting picked on by the school bullies. Johnny steps in and beats the crap out of a bunch of kids, which is a funny callback to Mr. Miyagi doing the same thing to Johnny and his friends. And it even gets brought up later. We'll get into that because I don't want to. We're still talking about the beginning here. So he defends himself against these bullies, beats him up, gets arrested. But Miguel is like, "Oh my God, this guy's my hero. I can't believe this guy stepped up for me." Now Johnny is what you would call an anti-hero. He's not very politically correct. He doesn't always say the right thing, but you can kind of tell early on in this series that his heart is in the right place. He's just been beaten down his whole life, and that's been hard for him to overcome. He grew up wealthy, like they talked about in the plot synopsis there, but you find out in this show that his mother has died, and that basically his stepfather has cut him off. So he has no money. He doesn't want his stepfather's money because his stepfather was an abusive prick. And that leads Johnny down a path of destruction, of self-destruction.
He makes some poor choices, but you can't help but feel for the character.
No, you can't. And it really... and it goes to, too, it shows... Because then when we meet Daniel LaRusso, also in his 50s, has 2 kids, married, owns a bunch of car dealerships, uses karate and bonsai trees in his salesmanship, a lot in his ads and stuff. He hasn't grown up either. Johnny has struggled because he hasn't gotten anything. Daniel has struggled because he's gotten everything. So they still look at each other as their rivals. When, I mean, come on, you're adults in your 50s. You gotta move on at some point. But it's clear that Johnny ties a lot of his failures to that All-Valley Championship loss. And
the way they set Daniel up, he almost seems like the bad guy, like the pompous ass, if you will. I think it's in the first episode or 2 where the 2 characters, their paths diverge.
Yes, it's the second episode with his car.
Okay.
Yeah.
Daniel kind of goads at him, and Johnny just wants to get out of there, doesn't want anything to do with him, doesn't want Daniel's help or anything like that. And, he's just kind of goading at him. And, I mean, it's not completely unprovoked because Johnny's kind of being a dick, but I don't know. It's a very interesting dynamic in the way the 2 characters were kind of flipped during this presentation, in my opinion.
So, and that's early on. I think as the series goes along, that neither one of them is a villain. And I think we start to realize that they're just 2 men kind of living in the past.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out how to live in the future. And they both struggle with that. And I thought that was an interesting take because you hear a generic explanation of this show is Daniel's the real villain now. And I don't think that's true. I think he still views Johnny as this big bully when he's got to realize that Johnny was not necessarily forced, but he was trained to be the way that he was and didn't have a lot of choices. And when he did have the choices, when he got older, he made all the wrong choices. So he's a man still dealing with this. And it's an interesting character arc for William Zabka to play. And I think acting-wise, it makes me feel sad that we haven't used him in more things, in Hollywood, hasn't cast him in more things, because he's actually really good here.
Yeah, his range is pretty deep. I was surprised, especially for a 22-minute TV type series, how just dark that he is able to go.
Yes, and this show does a lot of trying to make him they give him moments, they give him highs. He has lots of highs, but then he's got the lowest of lows, and it's it sucks because he keeps climbing up and then he falls back down. And you see that a lot, I think, in season 2 with Daniel is the same thing. Daniel finally is I'm going to start my karate school up and we're going to compete. Doesn't go well. No one wants to join his karate school because they think it's lame. They think I love that they bring up that he's stealing the culture. I thought that was a great modern tie-in to that's how, because he did his ad with a Japanese folk song, which was Mr. Miyagi's favorite song, but nobody knows that. You post that to the internet. Sounds like a white guy trying to steal the culture, Japanese culture. And it's funny how they address that on the show, and I think that came off really good on how they did that. And his defense of it wasn't stupid either. It wasn't it didn't make him seem racist or anything. It was just, that's how he was brought up. Mr. Miyagi was basically like his father. His dad passed away long ago, so Mr. Miyagi was Daniel's father figure. So a lot of the culture that he has taken, if you will, from the Japanese is because Mr. Miyagi taught him that culture, and that's just the culture that he grew up in. Kind of based his whole life on it, really. The fact that he's using the bonsai trees to sell cars. So this show has a good back and forth between Daniel and Johnny. Season 1, there isn't really any good moments with them, because Johnny's kind of made to look like the jerk at the end, because Robbie, who is Johnny's son, trains with Daniel in season 1 to learn karate, to kind of one-up his dad and be like, hi, your rival taught me karate. What are you going to do now? But ends up actually liking it. And Daniel is kind of on the outs with Robbie at the end when they go to the All-Valley Championship, because he didn't tell Daniel that's why he was there in the first place. But he really has learned from Daniel and wants Daniel to understand that he wants to be there.
Right.
So
and Daniel abandons Robbie at the end of season 1.
He does, but then he doesn't. He does it. It's because he shows that Robbie signs himself up, and Daniel's like, oh, what's he doing here? And then as it goes on, he's seeing that Robbie has actually taken what he's taught him and learned and able to go through all these competitors and make it to the championship. Robbie does get hurt by one of my least favorite characters on the show, Hawk. And it's a cheap shot to the back. And Daniel, kind of the way Miyagi did the same thing for Daniel in Karate Kid Part 1, Daniel talks him up hey, you don't have to go out there if you don't want to, but if you can do it, you can do it. And I'll be in your corner. So Daniel kind of joins his corner for the championship. And it's Miguel, Johnny's standout student and friend from the beginning of the series, is in there with him. And Miguel is fighting Robbie, who is Johnny's son. And Miguel and Hawk don't know this yet. And Miguel wins. And he wins by a couple cheap shots, taking out the bad, I believe it's a bad leg, bad shoulder. It's the bad, same side, bad left shoulder for Robbie.
There's a cute little funny homage where it looks like Daniel is going to do the clap the hands and rub them together thing, and that calls for the trainer.
Yes. That was funny, too. There's lots of...
Let's also not leave out the fact that there is a little love triangle. Well, not really a love triangle, but Miguel is dating Daniel's daughter.
Yes.
And Daniel's daughter is also friendly with Robbie.
Yes. And that leads more into... There's more drama for that in season 2. But by the end of the season, when Miguel and Samantha are kind of on the outs, she sees that he's turning into a big jerk and blames Cobra Kai for that. So he doesn't even she doesn't even stay to see him win and beat Robbie because she doesn't like him at that point. And so the season kind of ends with... Well, we'll get to the main ending, but the tournament ends with Miguel beating Robbie and Johnny going over, apologizing for Miguel hurting Robbie. And Robbie kind of actually says, okay, it's okay. whatever, and they part ways. And then, so Johnny's kind of upset because he didn't want his kids to be dirty like that. He didn't want them to be like Kreese taught them. They took the no mercy part very seriously. Season 1 ends with one of the scariest cameos that you could have, and that's John Kreese entering the Cobra Kai dojo.
Yep, cigar and all.
Cliffhanger. It ends right there, and you're just like, oh God, what's going to happen next? So then, son of a bitch. Season 2 kicks off with Johnny and Mr. Kreese not having a good relationship. Johnny obviously still resenting a lot of what Kreese had taught him. Kreese makes him believe that he's changed, and that he's a different man, and that he's going to help Johnny teach these kids. It takes a couple episodes, and Johnny finally lets him in. And as you can tell, that eventually becomes a mistake. So Johnny's kids, the Cobra Kai, they have turned into a bunch of bullies, basically. They go around picking on some of the other kids. The biggest rivalry in this season, I think, is between Hawk and Dimitri. Dimitri and Hawk were best friends in season 1. Hawk had a deformity on his lip. People made fun of him, so Johnny told him, if they're going to make fun of you, be different. So he turned himself into this tattooed mohawk character named Hawk. And he's more of a badass, but he's a real a-hole. And he becomes a bully. He picks on his old best friend just for saying things that he used to like. And he really becomes a character to loathe. And I think that's their point. I'm assuming at some point in this series we'll get a redemption out of him. It hasn't happened yet.
Maybe not. And I mean, Jacob Bertrand, who plays Eli/Hawk, he's doing a fantastic job being.
He is, yes. He's doing a really good job. And maybe that's why I hate him so much, because he's so good at it. And there is almost a redemption arc towards the end, but then when Hawk realizes other people are around, he calls him a loser and walks away, and then that leads Dimitri to start this huge fight. And it's not good. And it leads to this big brawl at the school, which, if you're not a Karate Kid fan, watching this big brawl at school is kind of funny, because it's really cheesy, because I can't imagine it actually being allowed to, sprawl out. They do make some jokes where, they try to get the teachers involved, and the teachers are like, oh, hell no, I'm not getting involved in this. I don't get paid enough, and they walk away. And I understand that. These kids are beating the crap out of each other right in the middle of school. There's this a love triangle between Tori, Miguel, and Samantha in this season. Even though Samantha's with Robbie, there's still this love triangle with Miguel and this girl, Tori. Because when Sam gets, earlier in the season, when Sam gets drunk at a party, she kisses Miguel, and Miguel backs off oh my God, I don't want to cheat on Tori. But there's obviously something still there. Tori saw them, and that's what leads to this huge fight at the end of the series. And it's a huge brawl. People getting kicked everywhere, glass getting broken, and it's just insane. And it's almost like the whole episode.
Yeah, it's very off-putting. It almost feels like something else is happening at the school to cause panic and mayhem and fear in everybody. But it's really just a karate fight.
It's a karate brawl throughout the entire building. Yeah, so I mean, that is the finale episode of the season. Again, we said we're going to talk spoilers. So what happens is Miguel shows mercy on Robbie because they're fighting. And Robbie gets up and then kicks Miguel. And I don't think he means to, but he kicks him over the railing. And Miguel falls, 2 flights down in the school. I've never seen a school with a staircase like that, but okay. Only in California, I guess. And he's at the end. You're left at the end of this episode not knowing whether he's going to be okay, really even not knowing if he's going to live or not. I mean, they kind of play that up too, and obviously Johnny feels like crap. Johnny feels bad that it got this bad, that these kids felt that this was the way to get their point across. I guess he feels like he was a part of that, and in a way he is, and so is Daniel, because they brought.
And also, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Also, the fact that he's basically lost Cobra Kai, or a vast majority of his students, because of Kreese's underhanded backstabbing tactics.
Yes. So at the end, you're left with Kreese. He goes back to the dojo after he started drinking already. He goes back to the dojo. hears people in the dojo, goes in there and creases it in the back teaching the kids, and they don't want Johnny there anymore because he taught Miguel to show mercy, and that's why Miguel is, on death's door. What I like about this scene is Johnny actually handles it how you should handle it. He obviously feels horrible what happened to Miguel, but he still knows that the way Kreese is teaching is wrong. He doesn't lament and go back to like, oh yeah, you're right, I should have no. He just regrets, I think, the whole thing. He regrets bringing Cobra Kai back to begin with, which is huge. I think it's a huge step for Johnny to show growth, really, that like he understands he made a huge mistake here. And I'm assuming as we get into season 3, that'll be his mistake to fix. One of my favorite character additions is Paul Walter Hauser, who plays the adult Stingray. Raymond, a.k.a. Stingray. He's a guy who he meets at like a grocery store or whatever, wherever he's working. And he finds out Johnny does karate, and he goes there to sign up, and he's an adult man. And he's like, Johnny's like, this is for kids. And he's like, Sensei, I believe you could teach me, and only you could teach me. And he lets him stay because he's got money. And it leads to a very interesting character arc for that character. I like him as an actor, so it was really fun to see him in this. And obviously the big reveal at the end of season 3 is Allie from Karate Kid Part 1 has been kind of a big character that we haven't seen, and she looms big over the whole show because at one point when Johnny and Daniel are actually having like a good conversation, they're reminiscing about her. There are points in the show too where Johnny and Daniel are friendly to each other right before the end, actually, too, right before that big brawl at the school. And that obviously this is going to put a wrench in that, as you saw in the elevator scene. But it ends with the biggest tease of all, and that is Johnny's phone is thrown in the sand somewhere, and you see it lights up, and Allie, who he sent a Facebook friend request to earlier in the season, she has accepted his friend request. So that's a big tease for season 3. We assume that Elizabeth Shue will be back as Allie. That'll be a big, I think, thing for Johnny. I think it'll tie into Miguel because she's a doctor. And I think that's what's going to happen. It's like she's going to end up being the doctor that he has to go see or something because she's a specialist or something. I don't know. That's just my thought about it.
I heard a ridiculous rumor where she is actually the mother of Tori, or related to Tori in some way, and that's how it's going to be a tie-in. That's a bit of a stretch. I think the doctor thing is a much...
That would be kind of ridiculous just because her and her husband are like they're both doctors with like a shit ton of money. In the show, Tori talks about how she comes from nothing, and she talks to me about it to Miguel, saying, we got to fight for more because we don't have what they have. And so I think that would be a weird twist if she was part of her family.
I like the angle you were talking about much better. She's much more believable, and
and I think
a natural entry point.
Yes, I think she'll be, like I said, I think she might be the person that gets him back on track because obviously I don't think Daniel will be able to do it. I think they're going to work more together in the 3rd season, just the way it ends up. And obviously there'll be a lot of forgiving that'll have to be done. It is interesting. We don't know where Tori and Robbie are at the end of season 2. Robbie ran away, and Tori is talked about, but they don't say she's been arrested or anything. Samantha's mom just threatens to, get her expelled from school, but Sam is more worried about Miguel and how he's doing because she thinks it's her fault that all this started in the first place. So yeah, there's your first 2 seasons of Cobra Kai. Very well done, I thought. My buddy texted me yesterday. He's like, Cobra Kai has no business being as good as it is. It is really good. It's really enthralling. It's captivating. It makes you want more. They're short. They're like 22 to 36 minutes.
You sit down to watch the first episode, and you're probably going to just sit and watch the whole thing straight through.
Yes.
Unless you have something pre-planned, you're going to find a reason to just sit and watch the whole thing.
Yes, I agree. And the first day I probably watched like 7 episodes, and I did take a little bit of a break, but then when I went back, I finished it like that day. So like, but again, I want to stress William Zabka, I think, is an underappreciated actor. I think he plays this role really well. I like what they put him through. It's hard to watch sometimes because the drinking can be an issue, obviously. But they really humanize him in a way that we should humanize people like that. Like, just because he was a bully doesn't mean he's less of a person. He's just a person, and he was a teenager. And so much hatred and blame was put upon him for what happened back in the day, when a lot of it was an adult teaching kids to do the wrong thing. So it's a really good character on television, I think, right now. And that's what made me like this series a lot. I would give it 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5. It's that good. William Zabka is definitely worth the watch here. You know, it's hard. It would be hard not seeing Ralph Macchio as Daniel LaRussa. I still don't think he's a great actor in this, but he plays the part well enough to be believable. His best role to me is still My Cousin Vinny. But yeah, like in this, he's good still. And he goes through a lot of stuff too. He lives his life through the past, and you can't do that as you get older. So I think he has a lot to learn. Johnny has a lot to learn, and we're going to get a really killer season 3, I think, which is apparently it's shot. I don't know if it's edited and ready to go, but it is coming out 2021 on Netflix. I assume they'll renew it after that. Look out for that. It's going to be spectacular. Wayne, your final thoughts on Cobra Kai?
You pretty much hit the nail on the head. I absolutely loved it. I powered through the first season in like 2 days. And then same thing when the second season came out. I employed the same tactic with YouTube Red. A friend of ours, Vinny, who signed up for a membership. And,
nice. I didn't know that he signed up for it. That's funny.
We actually powered through season 1 and 2 in 2 days.
Nice.
At work. It was a slow time, but still, it was at work.
Very nice.
Yeah,
very
absolutely
nice.
Great. The characters are compelling. I really like Mary Moser, who plays Samantha LaRusso.
Yeah, she's really good.
She's a very compelling, very likable character. And played very well by Tori. I don't remember who the actress's name is.
Peyton List plays Tori, yeah.
She is equally dislikable, so...
Yes.
Yeah. I really like Nicole Brown. She is the friend of Samantha, who Samantha kind of ditches because she's not really cool enough, and she finds a place in Cobra Kai. And she's not your your typical actor, your beautiful actress.
Yes.
You know, she's a little bit heavy, she's a little bit awkward, but she is fantastic. She's one of the brightest spots in this show as a supporting character, and you can't help but root for her.
No,
especially when she starts beating the crap out of the boys.
Yes, no, she's really good. Her story arc has been pretty good so far. I can't wait to see where they go from there. So, so we love Cobra Kai. So, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. We're going to move on to Gone But Not Forgotten. We're going to talk about a gentleman that we both grew up with and loved. But first, let me just go over, we did have quite a few deaths this last week. Kevin Dobson from Knots Landing and Kojak. Bruce Williamson, one-time Temptations lead singer, died at only 49 years old. Ronald Bell, founding member of Kool and the Gang, passed away. Stevie Lee is a wrestler, American Horror Story actor, and part of the Jackass team in Jackass 3D. He passed away, unfortunately. Reggae singer Toots Hibbert, song featured on the Harder They Fall soundtrack, which was a big movie back in the 70s. He was a reggae singer. He passed away. And then, of course... Dame Diana Rigg from Game of Thrones, James Bond, star of the Avengers British TV show back in the 60s, passed away. She will be missed. Olenna Tyrell, all of them will be missed, obviously. But
you can smell the shit from 5 miles away.
She was great on Game of Thrones. She was great on apparently on the Avengers, and she was a Bond girl. Yeah. So rest in peace. But we're going to talk about the great late John Candy this week. John Candy, Canadian actor, comedian, was famous for being in a lot of movies. And he unfortunately passed away in 1994 while making...
Very young age of 43.
Yeah, you would think by looking at him he's a heavier man that he was older, but he wasn't. He was only 43 years old.
To say he was larger than life was not just a pun on his weight, though. Just the comedic talent that this man had. Gosh, just to think back and how long it's been. It's
been almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And he left us with a lot of work. Unlike some of the other actors like John Belushi or Heath Ledger, he left us with a lot. and more like a Philip Seymour Hoffman, who left us with a lot of work at a young age as well. John Candy, his vice was food. Rumor has it that's what somewhat caused his death. I'm not sure if that was what the direct cause was. I believe it was a heart attack. But he had been acting for quite some time in the 70s. He was also part of SCTV, which was the Canadian version of Saturday Night Live, basically. But I think to American audiences, he was in 1941, but the main movie that shot him to stardom, I think, would be Stripes. And when he played Dewey Oxburger in Stripes, he was in a movie with Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, so you already got two really funny guys. But he was like it's funny because those guys are hilarious, but he was kind of the comic relief of the movie. And he was great in this movie. They used his weight, obviously, as a lot of the jokes, but it fit the character very well. He wasn't shy about it. It's really fun in how he played it. Obviously, he had a small part in the Blues Brothers as well.
Army training.
He was a voice in Heavy Metal, which people, obviously, that's a really cool movie if you haven't seen it.
Right. But we could do a whole show on John Candy movies. I'm just looking at this now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
My goodness. The cameo in Home Alone.
National Lampoon's Vacation. But he's at the very end. He's the guy at Wally World.
Do you have a favorite John Candy movie? While you decide, I'm going to talk about mine. Mine is the 1991 film Only the Lonely. It stars John Candy, Maureen O'Hara, Ali Sheedy, Kevin Dunn, Jim Belushi makes an appearance. John Candy. This takes place in Chicago, so I have some sentiment there. A Chicago cop must balance loyalty to his overbearing mother and a relationship with the shy funeral home worker. Basically, his mother is a manipulative, overbearing, a bully in many ways. Just very judgmental, very old school. And he plays a police officer, and through circumstances, he meets a young funeral director's daughter, played by Ali Sheedy. They strike up a friendship, which turns into a relationship. The mother doesn't like this because Ali Sheedy's character and family are Sicilian. They are Irish, so apparently the Irish and the Sicilians don't get along for some reason, but there are issues there. But one of the main reasons I like this film is because there is a scene shot in Old Comiskey Park right before it was torn down, where John Candy, Danny Muldoon takes Ali Sheedy's character, Teresa Luna, on a date to the ballpark where they have a picnic on the infield. The exploding scoreboard goes off, and it's nostalgia for me and the times that I got to spend at this place, making memories and whatnot. So it's cute. It is a bit dated, obviously, with just stereotypes and the way we view things have changed a bit, but it is a great movie. It ends up being a feel-good story, and it's one of these ones where he lets the girl get away and has to chase her down, type thing. So yeah. Of all the movies that John Candy has done, it's not actually it's got comedic undertones, but it's got heart and feeling to it. So that is why it is my favorite John Candy movie.
I don't know if I could pick a favorite, so I'm just going to talk about one that I really love, and it's mainly from my childhood, and that is Uncle Buck. So, all right, so Uncle Buck is about Bob and Cindy Russell and their three children, 15-year-old Tia, 8-year-old Miles, and 6-year-old Maisie. Miles was played by the lovable child actor Macaulay Culkin at the time. He was obviously very big. Home Alone was huge. And this movie made him, even a bigger star because so everyone knows Macaulay Culkin these days from Home Alone and a bunch of other stuff and being Macaulay Culkin because he's still, around and, not got into drugs or anything. He still has a lot of his money from when he was a kid, so he's basically able to do what he wants. But he was great in this movie. John Candy was fantastic as Uncle Buck. He, saves these kids get themselves in some precarious situations, and he has to show up and be the hero, and he does a really good job at that. And it's just always stuck with me. There's, like you said, going through the list, we could have an entire podcast on John Candy. I'm going to go back and look at some and talk about, or just mention some of the other movies. But in this movie, Uncle Buck, Macaulay Culkin, Gabby Hoffman, who's still an actress today, Amy Madigan is in it. Jay Underwood, Brian Tarantino, who just passed away recently, he's in it. Laurie Metcalf has a small role in it. Mike Starr, another big actor from the 80s and 90s. It's just a really good film, and it's a very good family type film, but it's kind of somewhat edgier, than most family films. It's directed by John Hughes and written by Hughes as well, and it's just so funny and entertaining, and to me, one of my favorite John Candy performances. But
here's a quarter. Why don't you go downtown and have a rat and gnaw that thing off your face? Boom.
Lots of good one-liners from that movie.
That, and I've never seen a power drill look so scary in my life.
Here's some other ones he's in, though, too. Splash. This one's one of my favorites, Brewster's Millions. He's not the lead character. That's Richard Pryor. I've always loved Brewster's Millions. It probably is similar to what Wayne mentioned when he was talking about Only the Lonely and the White Sox scene. Brewster's Millions, they're Cubs fans. So it's really kind of, as a Cubs fan, you really get drawn to that.
Building off of the Cubs thing, let's not forget he is the announcer and Rookie of the Year.
He is the announcer and Rookie of the Year. He was in Summer Rental, Armed and Dangerous, which I talked about previously on the podcast. Another cameo type role in Little Shop of Horrors. Obviously, one of my favorite roles of his, Barf in Spaceballs. Yeah. Legendary character, legendary role. Spoof on Chewbacca, obviously. Great movie, hilarious. He was hilarious in that movie.
I'm a mug. I'm half man, half dog. I'm my own best friend.
A movie
Let's not forget the Thanksgiving classic, though, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Del Griffith.
Yes. He is great in that movie. It's not one of my favorites of his. I know it's probably sacrilegious for me to say that because people love that movie. I like that movie. I don't love it. But I do think that he is great in that movie, and it's a great role for him. Another one, The Great Outdoors. That's another one of my personal favorites. Him and Dan Aykroyd.
I just watched that yesterday.
Oh, so good. So good.
Dan Aykroyd is over the top in that movie.
Oh, yeah, he is. As he was often back then. Yeah, he is.
What's funny is he's got one of those giant mobile phones from the 80s. And
yeah, oh, yeah.
Complaining about, the reception's terrible on these things.
He's such a D-bag in that movie. And yeah, it's funny, though. It's a good movie. Obviously, you mentioned Home Alone. The Rescuers Down Under, he played Wilbur. I used to love that movie as a kid. Here's a movie that I don't think gets talked about enough. It's a dark comedy. People hated this movie back then. Nothing But Trouble. He plays two characters, a brother and a sister, Deputy Dennis and Eldonna. It's a dark comedy starring Chevy Chase, directed by Dan Aykroyd, and starring Dan Aykroyd as the creepy old father of John Candy's two characters. It's just a weird, bizarre movie that I like. I think because it's so weird and bizarre, that's why I like it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It stars Digital Underground, including Tupac when he was just a dancer / rapper. And it's funny, it's dark, it's weird, and I like it. And John Candy is great in it, and the two characters. He did Delirious, which was funny, JFK, Once Upon a Crime, Rookie of the Year, and probably one that everybody recognizes him from and talks about still to this day, Cool Runnings. He plays the coach.
Irving Blitzer.
Yes, Irv Blitzer. It's great. He's great in that role. The other actors, Dougie Doug and Leon, and he only has one name. I'm not forgetting his last name. He goes by Leon. There are a bunch of actors in that movie that are really good.
From the infamous Madonna video, Like a Prayer.
Yep. Malik Yoba, Dougie Doug, Leon, who they actually credited as Leon Robinson on here, but I know he only goes by Leon. And Raul D. Lewis played the Jamaican bobsled team that John Candy coaches. And
Yul Brynner.
Yes. And he's really good in it. And yeah, I mean, it's a good movie. If you haven't seen it, I'm pretty sure it's on Disney Plus now because they.
Thank you. You dead? Yeah, man.
He unfortunately ended his career with Wagons East and Canadian Bacon. Wagons East is pretty bad. Canadian Bacon isn't terrible. I enjoyed parts of Canadian Bacon. I did like the scene where Dan Aykroyd plays a Mountie in Canada, and he pulls them over because they have Canada sucks written on the side of their truck, and he informs them they're worried that he's going to arrest them because they're insulting Canada. He informs them that their insult needs to be both in English and French, so they write it in French. Funny movie, the only non-documentary directed by Michael Moore, who also has a cameo in it. Just really funny. It is really underrated in my opinion. It's not. Let's be honest. It's not a great movie, but still underrated.
Indeed.
But yeah, so I mean, the guy, he did a lot, and in a short amount of time, like we talked about, it was basically from the 70s, early 70s to the early to mid 90s. 94 was his last movie that came out. He died in the beginning of 94. I believe it was on the set of Wagons East, actually.
Yes, in Mexico.
Yeah, so it's his, he's one of those actors that I often think about and just miss. Kind of like we talked about with Chris Farley. I just miss that I never got to see another movie by him. Yep. And it hit hard as a kid because he was in so many, like Uncle Buck and Great Outdoors. Yeah. He was in a lot of our movies. So it hit, like, you're like, oh crap, like John Candy just died? Like, oh my God. And it was hard for me, I think, when I was younger. I don't, like I said before, I don't really cry when celebrities die. But I'm sure as a kid I was like, oh man, this really sucks. Mm-hmm. And he was just a joy to watch. So he's one of those actors I enjoy going back and watching his movies.
Yes.
Even the ones where he just says like small roles in, like National Lampoon's Vacation, where he's only at the end of the movie. He's hilarious in that movie as the security guard to Wally World. Yep. When they take him on the rides and stuff. It's so funny.
Yeah, or the bad guy in Blues Brothers. You can't get enough of him. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still go back to Home Alone because that's probably the movie that I watched the most.
Yes.
And obviously, he's like the hero to
Catherine O'Hara's character.
Catherine O'Hara's character, thank you. Well, I'm the polka king of the Midwest. Polka, polka. Hallelujah. Kiss me, polka?
Yes.
And they're just sitting there playing polka in the back of this moving truck. And it's just, I don't know. Just those little things, man.
It was always...
Making the pancake with the birthday pancake.
Yeah.
With the shovel and Uncle Buck. I mean...
He was always that guy that Hollywood would turn to when they needed like a quick, funny actor. Yeah. And sometimes it was for big roles like Spaceballs and Uncle Buck, and sometimes it was for those small roles like in Home Alone, National Lampoon's Vacation.
Or like when she's Her Majesty's matched luggage.
Yes. Fantastic. So, to John Candy, we say we hope you're resting in peace. You left an impression, obviously, on two big comedy fans and movie fans here. It was great to have you while you were around. And then we're going to move on to things that we've watched. We're going to keep this one a little short. I haven't watched as much as I usually do. I did watch some movies that I would consider some of the best movies I've seen this year. I'll just quickly go through. Good Woman is Hard to Find. Stars Sarah Bulger as a woman whose husband gets murdered, and the cops think he was a drug dealer, so they really don't investigate it. It takes place like in Ireland, and she wants answers. And she gets involved with this drug dealer who stole from the other drug dealers, breaks into her house and makes him, he forces her to keep him there and keep control of his drugs. She's forced to do some things that, she normally wouldn't do. It's a great revenge story, really good movie, probably one of the best I've seen in a little while. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, directed by Charlie Kaufman, just hit Netflix. Charlie Kaufman movies are weird and bizarre. Adaptation, Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Human Nature, all very weird movies. His directing movies are even a lot weirder. Anomalisa and Schenectady, New York with Philip Seymour Hoffman, both strange movies. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is no different. It's very bizarre. It's very weird. Very much my cup of tea. I love this movie. I thought it was fantastic. Not for everybody. The Witch, Part 1, The Subversion. It's a foreign film on Netflix, a South Korean action flick. I really dug this movie a lot. It's really cool. It's basically like a superhero movie. This girl has these powers, but is she hiding them from everybody, or is she just pretending to hide them from everybody? She doesn't remember who she is, or does she remember who she is? It's one of those things that you just have to see. It's really cool, very cool action flick. I rewatched Homefront with Jason Statham, very good. Frequency with Frequency with Dennis Quaid, also a great movie. The last new one I watched was Baby Teeth. And that's another 2020 drama. It's about a girl with cancer, and she is trying to kind of live her whole life in the short amount of time that she has left. Very sad. It's a drama. It stars Eliza Scanlon from Little Women, Ben Mendelsohn, and Essie Davis, who's from Babadook. And it's such a good movie. I recommend checking it out. And one quick thing, I watched Young Wallander on Netflix. It's a cop show based on a Swedish TV character. It's about his younger years. I thought it was really well done. If you like British style cop shows, it's really worth checking out. It's like 6 episodes, so go through it pretty quick. Wayne, what about you this week?
I watched one of the biggest thing that stood out for me this week is I watched #Alive. It is it's a zombie flick. I believe it's from South Korea.
I think so. I haven't watched that one yet, but I think you're right.
I didn't do my due diligence about getting all of the info about this movie, but it was a pretty entertaining zombie flick. Again, it takes place, in the metropolitan area of, I'm going to say South Korea. Please forgive me if I'm wrong. And the outbreak occurs with focusing on a young man who is a gamer, streamer type thing, and he, just goes through the motions of 3 weeks and being trapped in his house where you start to run out of food and your water stops working. Eventually the power goes out, and eventually he's to the point where he's going to end his life, but another survivor convinces him to stop. They find a way to communicate. They find a way to reach each other, where they have to cross a courtyard filled with the undead. They make their way up to the roof, and I'm not going to say what happens because zombies
and it's new too.
Yeah, it just came out in 2020. It's on Netflix. Not as good as Train to Busan, but still, we're entering the Halloween season. If you're into zombies and stuff like that, which I'm not usually into horror, but zombies has a special place in my heart because I'm kind of twisted and demented too. Give this one a watch. It's dubbed over in English, so you don't have to read. There's a little bit of reading in there, but unlike Train to Busan, you hear everything spoken in English to you. So, it helps for those that have trouble keeping up. Other than that, I've also been watching Chef's Table, Barbecue Edition on Netflix. As everybody knows, if you don't know, I'm a barbecue aficionado. I like the low and slow smoking of delicious meats. So that appeals to me. I also finally got around to watching Abducted in Plain Sight. This is a documentary on Netflix that's a few years old. I'll give you a little synopsis breakdown here. It's this family of 5. Father, mother, and 3 daughters, and the oldest daughter is become the desire of the next door neighbor, the father, and he ends up manipulating the entire family into sexual deviance and just all around, what the hell is going on here? And at one point I found myself going, okay, you cannot be this stupid to let this man continue to fool and manipulate you. But hey, I wasn't there. I wasn't involved. It was the 70s. Maybe people were harder to fool back then, but just what is going on? Are you kidding me? Is what I kept repeating to myself over and over through this thing. This is about an hour and a half of your time. Give it a watch. It's a thing. So it's crazy.
I remember Rebecca watched most of it by herself, and then I caught up with it. It's nuts. It really is. It's one of those shows that you have to keep reminding yourself it's reality and that this actually happened.
But other than that, that's pretty much it. They took that 70s show off of Netflix, and I was only through the second season, and it's just gone, nowhere to be found. So I'm a little bummed that I didn't get to finish that.
It'll pop up somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, I need to hurry up because I don't have anything to watch before bed.
For recommendations, all I'll recommend this week is watch Cobra Kai on Netflix. We talked about it. Check that out. All right, so we're going to get into I'm going to run through the news stuff real quick here. Nomadland, starring Frances McDormand and directed by Chloe Zhao. I'm talking about this movie because it's pretty cool how they did it. It's basically Chloe Zhao, who's the director of Eternals, the new Marvel movie coming out next year. Did this movie with Frances McDormand right before she did Eternals. She knew she was doing Eternals, so she wanted to do this quick road movie that her and Frances McDormand talked about when McDormand was winning the awards for 3 Billboards. And it's just apparently it's Frances McDormand riding around the Midwest and meeting people. A lot of the actors in the movie are people they found while they were shooting this movie. They aren't real actors. It's an interesting concept. It just won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, which is their most coveted award. Neve Campbell is returning for Scream 5. Oscars have a new inclusive rule that will be in place by 2024. This is more just talk, I think. You know what? Just stop. Understand that there's other people of other colors that can make movies, and you should look at those movies more than just looking at movies that are directed and starring all white people. Instead of putting this rule in that actually people have gone through this rule, there's a lot of ways to get away with it and still make the movies the way they're being made today. So just be more inclusive altogether, and I don't think you need this rule in there. Amazon acquires Nick Cage Tiger King series. We talked about that, I believe, last week. Fresh Prince Reunion airs in November on HBO Max. The Dark reboot has found a home. It's going to Peacock with a 2-season order. Will Smith will be producing that, as he is. I wanted to mention this earlier. Will Smith is still a producer on the Karate Kid series. He's a producer on Cobra Kai. I always find that interesting when I watch the opening credits of that. Wonder Woman 84 has been delayed till Christmas. Blind Spotting is being turned into a TV show at Starz. Blind Spotting is a movie about race and cops, brutality, and it's really good. I've talked about that movie before. It's fantastic. You should watch it, but they're making it into a Starz series now. I'm excited about that. Movies coming out. Spiral hits Shudder on September 17th. That's a horror film. Rebecca by Ben Wheatley, the director of Kill List and Free Fire, starring Armie Hammer, Lily James, and Kristen Scott Thomas. Hits Netflix October 21st. Blackpink documentary hits Netflix October 14th. They are a K-pop girl group. I know my granddaughters are huge fans. Hubie Halloween, the next Netflix movie from Adam Sandler, hits October 7th. We will be talking about that one when it comes out. A Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting, October 14th on Netflix. Ratched, which is stars Sarah Paulson, created by Ryan Murphy, tells the story of Nurse Ratched from the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest novel and film. It's Nurse Ratched. It comes out September 18th on Netflix. Clouds is a Disney Plus movie coming out October 16th about a young singer who died of cancer. It looks pretty depressing. Freaky from Happy Death Day director Christopher Landon stars Catherine Newton from Blockers and Supernatural, Vince Vaughn, and Alan Ruck. It's a body switch horror film serial killer movie coming out Friday the 13th in November. And it's going to be in theaters, and Vince Vaughn plays a serial killer, so he body switches with a teenager. It looks hilarious. I can't wait to see this movie.
Nice.
It looks fantastic. And that is it. That's all I got for this week. Thank you for listening. We do appreciate it. It's been real fun doing this podcast. We hope to continue keep doing it. We've been doing it for 3 months now, so that's pretty crazy.
Absolutely. It's given us some sense of just meaning in this crazy 2020 that we're going through. So thanks for listening. Contact us if you think we need to talk about something, and stay tuned because guests will be coming soon.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.